Love podcast hate nonsense. Good morning, Sean.
Good morning.
Or good afternoon if you're watching this in the afternoon. And good morning, afternoon, evening, Richie Jones, friend of the podcast
Good
and
night.
polling whisperer at IPSOS.
That's right. Yeah. One of the best friends of the podcast, I'd say.
Okay, good. I get.
Is that what?
Just before.
Yeah.
I'm worried I'm coming across ambivalent to this title. You're like, yeah.
Do you know we've started? Right?
Yeah, I know that. I know that we started. I don't know why I did that. I think as I was saying before, I listened back, and I came across as quite ambivalent about being a friend of the pod. I assured you I was a friend of the pod, and then you hit me with it again, and I pulled a face. And I don't know why.
Is that what you planned?
I don't know. No, I don't know why.
You trying that out in the mirror last night.
Issues. He's got commitment issues. We call him a friend. He's like, ugh, no.
I know. It's okay.
He left the dinner table early last night. He goes, look, listen, love. I've got to go and practice my ambivalent face in the mirror, ready for tomorrow morning.
But I'm very pleased to be a friend of the pod.
I'm glad you are.
I'd like to assure you of.
They all like you as well. Yeah. You're a friend of all theirs.
Yeah.
Not just ours.
Okay, good.
You actually get some nice comments on the Patreon. We should share them with you.
Please do, because the only comments that I seem to have seen are the mean ones.
Oh, don't look at them. Don't look at them at all.
Yeah.
I've
Best
got a
practice
guy.
is not to look at any of them.
Yeah.
And we'll give you the good ones.
Okay, that would be nice. Thank you.
I've got a nice guy at the moment actually on Twitter, and I wait for. I'll tweet about anything, anything.
The good morning guy.
No, I love him. But there's another guy called Buddy, and he replies to all of my tweets with like the most atrocious messages you've ever seen. But they come within 30 seconds of me posting. And it's so now I feel I have a relationship with him.
Yeah.
You know, I'm like, well,
He'll be loving this.
Yeah. But I appreciate him. I told him yesterday.
How atrocious are the messages?
They are awful.
Really?
Really awful.
Are they're not DMs, they're like replies.
Yeah, replies, a real assassination of like my looks, my personality.
Oh my God.
Totally
Buddy.
on guard. Yeah, I'm a big fan. Anyway, we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about pornography. So if you're a fan of porn, this is going to be the one for you.
You're going to love this.
Yeah.
Richie, talk us through a little bit. What have you been polling? What have you been asking people?
So we've this is the latest one in the series about kind of modern masculinity, but obviously we're talking to everyone, not just young men. We're talking about porn. We sort of worked our way up to this one. There are probably a couple of foundational topics around masculinity. The last time I was on, we talked about finances, and it feels like actually just the economics is quite a foundational push around some of the stuff that we're seeing that we think is quite problematic when it comes to young men, right? So it's kind of pushing them into crypto, into sports betting, into a competitive kind of scarcity mindset that's showing up in all sorts of quite unhelpful ways. The other foundational element of this probably we could argue is porn. So we're talking a little bit today about porn, who watches it, why they watch it, perceptions of its harm, and also talking a little bit about whether people think there needs to be more checks and balances around it.
Because we've had a huge introspection actually from a media perspective for the last 5 years or so, right? And it is dominated, I think, by a lot of people who are frightened by online pornography and perhaps don't really understand the prevalence of it, or don't really understand that perhaps you can have a healthy relationship with pornography.
Yeah.
I'm just here batting for the fans of pornography. That's what I'm here today.
Yeah.
Chief porn defender.
Pull out my big Pornhub hat in a moment and put it on. Not Spawn. Okay, talk to me about the generational divide when it comes to attitudes to pornography.
So there's a whole bunch of studies been done around who actually watches porn. In our survey, we asked people to basically say that they watch it or they don't watch it and how regularly they watch it or not. And I know, kind of preempting the comments, because we sometimes do get questions about methodology, people do tend to be quite genuine in their responses to this, and the data that we found is congruent with other studies that have been done by a variety of different bodies. So porn is gendered. More men watch it than women, overwhelmingly so. So 3 in 5 men report ever having watched porn, compared to 1 in 5 women. 93% of women 55 to 75 say that they've never watched it. versus 41% of men of the same age. So it's not necessarily a technology thing. And also 55 to 75-year-olds are all online anyway, but like it's not a kind of an access thing, because men of the same age, more men of the same age say they have. 58% of women aged 18 to 34 say they've never watched it, versus 25% of men of the same age. So it's much more men than women. And it's not necessarily, it's a bit of a young and old thing, but not necessarily as extreme as you would think. And kind of 58% of women 18 to 34 saying they've never watched it, we found quite surprising. We've got no reason to doubt the honesty or veracity of it. And, you know, we were talking a little bit before about the idea of kind of, you know, acceptable porn. And there's a lot of kind of people out in the kind of the media world who talk about, well, you know, it's for everybody, isn't it? And we've become much more enlightened about it. I'd question actually whether that's true or not, or whether that's sort of wishful thinking. It's still predominantly watched by men, created for men.
Well, that's the interesting bit, isn't it? Because Caitlin Moran has talked about this before. It's created. I mean, this is a sweeping statement, and I'm not from IPSOS, so this is not. There's no methodology behind this at all. But it is created with the male gaze in mind, right? Particularly a lot of the sort of the issues around pornography, certain aspects of it, certain, I was going to say maneuvers. What would be the correct one?
Well, I mean, just like the industry itself, like the American porn industry is arguably a male-dominated and for the male gaze industry.
I can't imagine going to like girl dinner and talking about pornography with my friends. And they talk about anything.
But then I don't know how many men go to men dinners and talk about porn. I mean, I'm
Do
sure.
you not?
I'm sure some didn't.
No.
When you two are out having dinner at Pizza Express, do you not talk
Seen
about
any
it?
good porn lately?
Yeah. It's
really.
like just before you leave, though. It's never like the conversation starter. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Just before you leave.
Yeah. Well, what are you gonna get up to when you get home?
Watching porn.
Yeah. No movies, no series.
It is interesting about the generational divide, or there not really being one, right? You being surprised by the lack thereof, because you would assume, particularly from the way that it's been written up by various tabloids, that this is a problem endemic to the under 35s.
Yeah, and I think the difference really, and we've spoken about this on the pod before, you know, the IPSOS company line on generational differences is that they mostly do not exist. So generational differences are valid when it comes to things like climate change, but on most things, we're not really looking at generations, looking at life stage. The key thing when we're talking about porn and life stage is that for 18 to 34-year-olds, the access to pornography has been so easy versus when I was 18, right? Like where are you going to get it from? Like you're not going to go into the newsagents where like your mum goes to get the paper and buy a porn mag. You're not going to go online. So where'd you get it from? And I was talking to some friends about this, and one of them said, and reminded me of this actually, it's like, well, you'd find it in a bush.
You'd what?
You'd find like and this is honestly, this happens so often, and everyone I mention this to agrees, of like my age and sort of gender. Like you'd be walking through the park and there'd be like a torn out page from a porn mag just shoved in a bush. No.
What?
Yeah.
It used to be a real country.
Yeah.
So, you know, you might
finish, you pass it on to the next guy.
Yeah, you might you might like, why were they looking at it in a bush? What are they doing? Are they getting rid of it? Is that the venue? I don't know. But quite commonly, you'd find it in places. Like when I take my dog for a walk and he finds like a discarded chicken nugget, and he's like, oh my God, it's the best day ever.
That's weird. I was thinking about that as an analogy, because I was thinking about a dog that goes back to the same park bench every single walk because there was once a Greggs sausage roll left underneath it.
Yeah, and it'd be like, you know, your mate would be like, I once found porn in a bush here. So the access, and I've been coming here every day since.
Also page 3, right?
There was page 3.
You know, which hasn't been around for quite some time. So that would probably be the easiest way to access it, right?
Yes.
If your dad was buying The Sun.
Yes, exactly. So I think
that didn't really happen in my household, but you know,
no,
he's a Liverpool fan.
No, come from Liverpool, not in the Sun.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was that, and I think that probably, you know, that then you then had the lads mags, and obviously the lads mags started off. I mean, the first issue of Loaded had Gary Oldman on the cover. By the end of it,
I remember it well.
By the end of it, there was you know, nudity in those magazines as well. So you could see this move, which then obviously once everyone went online, there was pornography. It was sort of like a bit of a tee up for all of that. So there's like an access thing. So 18 to 34-year-olds have grown up with the internet and therefore have had access to what we would call hardcore pornography. There was a study done by Dame Rachel D'Souza, who's the Children's Commissioner, a few years ago, who was looking at the effect and access and effect of porn on children. And she identified, some really interesting things, that basically access to porn, because the average age of first exposure is 13. This is why, Keir Starmer's so keen on kind of the Online Safety Act. And children who are watching it, there's measurable effects on body image, and it normalizes violent sexual practices, so that essentially, like, they grow up thinking that this stuff is normal. So when we'll get into kind of the perceived harms of porn in a minute. And obviously, generally, when we're having this conversation, we're talking about the polling. It's a judgment-free zone, right? Watch it, don't watch it. It's up to you. However, the increase in prevalence of violent pornography is a factor in a load of kind of behavioral stuff that you see in teenagers and young adults. And because that's predominantly gendered in terms of who watches it, it disproportionately affects young men. So I was at a talk last week where Jess Phillips was talking, and she's got some stats, and one of the stats that she has is that 30% of women under 30 say that they've been strangled during sex. And that essentially Jess Phillips's argument is that 20 years ago, it just wouldn't have been that number, and that no one would have thought that that was okay. And she attributes that and the rise of that practice to pornography and its depiction in pornography.
That's what I was getting at when I was talking about maneuvers. It really is. I mean, it's become so prevalent, hasn't it? But then there's also like a big rise now countering that sort of harmful pornography. You see a lot of women talking about it on TikTok, a lot about how it's actually harmed relationships with, say, quite dulcet, sweet men that they've dated, who think that this is an expectation, who think that this is actually what, this is what I'm meant to be doing, and actually are probably uncomfortable doing it themselves, but they think that that's what they're meant to be doing because they've seen it so often in pornography.
I think that it's the difference as well with a lot of the other polling that we've done, in that whether it was crypto or role models, whatever case we were talking about, we kind of get to a conclusion where there are problems, but it seems like young people, young men in particular, are aware of the problems, and the net fluency amongst young men is a lot to do with that. But when it comes to things like porn and how it impacts relationships, how it kind of shapes relationships from the male perspective, because having been a young man once, it's not a very comfortable conversation to talk about sex with your parents, and the conversations that you might have with your peers are all dependent on what you've seen or what you've perceived relationships to be. If you're accessing pornography at 13 and below, there's very little that an adult can do at that point to kind of
unpick. If you've got no one to talk about it with, you just sort of think that, well, that's what's expected.
And you're learning your first experience of sex is watching porn, sets a standard and expectation of this is just kind of what it's like. That's potentially quite harmful. I mean, I don't know, obviously a lot of this stuff is kind of, you get beyond statistics and you just get into like what people's own experiences were. I went to an all boys Catholic school. My mum was an Irish Catholic, so I don't think I ever had a conversation with her about that. So it's not
Three
always
Catholics on one bench.
It's not always. It
doesn't happen that often, does it?
Doesn't happen that often, does it?
The Last Supper as well. This is the last modern masculinity poll, isn't it?
It's the last one, and it's Good Friday tomorrow. This is
the last.
I'd hate to think what pornography has come out of the Last Supper.
Well, we were talking about it yesterday, weren't we, for that Sunday episode?
The Last Supper.
Yeah.
Yes,
There's so much time warp going on now. I'm talking about something we did yesterday for something that's going to come out 3 days after this. I'm getting very confused now.
So a lot of this is kind of down to sort of individuals, but I mean the do you want porn educating your children about sex, or do you want to get in and have that conversation first? And I think it's really difficult. And I talk to loads of people who are parents of 12, 13, 14-year-olds who are debating whether or not to broach the subject with their kids. while also having the quite bleak realization that they have probably seen porn. And okay, the age verification stuff, or what did you call it beforehand?
Oh, the porn passport?
Yeah, the
Was
porn
it?
pass. Yeah, the
Yeah.
porn passport. That might well have a positive effect, but then thinking about like what's the equivalent of sort of coming across porn in a bush is probably Twitter. So the prevalence of porn, or X, or whatever we want to call it, the prevalence of porn on X means that actually you can ban all the porn sites and need age verification for all those porn sites, but young people are still coming across it, and they're coming across it in school, and it's shared with them by other people. So yeah.
And some of us are leaving our Twitter open at work and coming back from lunch and seeing something you don't want to see, and the entire office has seen that you've been looking at that.
What is
Have you
that?
not seen that? If you're on Twitter and it just refreshes, something really graphic is up, coming back to your desk being like, that's not where I left it.
Yeah.
That wasn't me.
Yeah. Don't know why that's on there. And then someone says, well, it's based on the things that you look at. Like, is it?
Oh, I should have left my porn bush on my desk.
It's getting probably further away from that. So I think, look, so you're right, and you've sort of touched on it there, Sean. So when we asked young men about kind of the perceptions of porn's effects and whether it might be problematic, it was very much in line with when we taught them about crypto, gambling, social media, very cognizant of the harm that it causes, but through a combination of habit, addiction, social reinforcement, boredom, general disconnection, they do it anyway. So in terms of the level of consuming it, so young men 18 to 34, about 75% of them say that they have consumed porn. It's 78% of men aged 35 to 54. So it's basically the same. And there's little difference when it comes to frequency. So about 1 in 6 say they consume it at least once a week. At the other end, you've got 1 in 20 say that they consume it at least daily. So in terms of the age cohorts, the actual usage, the consuming of it's very similar. But they start to split apart when we talk about whether it's problematic. So 62% of young men say that porn is problematic for real life relationships between men and women. And that drops down to 45% for 35 to 55-year-olds and drops down to 36% for men aged 55 to 75. 68% of young men say that the age at which people start watching porn is a problem. And again, that stat starts to drop for the older age groups. And 54% of young men say that ease of access to porn is a problem. And again, that starts to drop off, although it's a smaller drop-off. So a really big drop-off is like it's problematic for real-life relationships between men and women.
Well, also because presumably, people who are older are in more established relationships, and so they haven't gone into their first relationship having been confronted with a daily onslaught of pornography. So that they're coming from a different life experience.
It's a life stage issue. And I guess older people, older men, older women just aren't seeing the effects of this as clearly. But interestingly, when we did the financial stuff last time, and we said to everybody, like, do you think it's harder to kind of, make your way in the world than it was 20 years ago? What we found was that older people were just as likely as young people to say, yeah, it is harder. We didn't have that effect where older people like, these guys don't know the born, it's always been difficult. Older people were saying, yeah, it is really difficult. And one of the things that we talked about was the effect of children and grandchildren. So seeing your kids and your grandkids struggling financially, no amount of media kind of bump around the fact that young people should eat fewer avocados, no amount of that makes up for sitting there at Christmas with your kid or your grandkid and hearing about the fact that even though they're working really hard and they're earning a decent wage, they can't afford a house, they can't afford anything. This is different because you're not going to talk about porn with your parents and your grandparents in that way. So that conversation, that Christmas conversation was kind of like, so, Dave, you're dating anyone nice? And they're like, nope. Not really. I'm finding it hard to maintain relationships because of my porn addiction.
Yes.
You're never going to say that, right? Depending on who your parents
ruined
are.
Christmas again.
Just ruined it again. So you're not going to have
caveat: no politics, no religion, no pornography.
No pornography, and no talk about its harmful effects. So you're not going to have that conversation. And so therefore, I think some of the effect of this is hidden. Yeah.
What have we got next?
So we asked people why they think people watch it. So look, we think that people accurately self-report, but sometimes we need to ask our questions in slightly different ways. And one of the things that we do is we ask people why they think other people watch porn, because we feel like what we're actually asking is why you watch it, but we're doing it slightly at one
We're
remove.
kind of in the accusatory segment of the podcast.
Yeah. So only 1 in 3 young men, 1 in 3 young men think that people watch porn because they don't have a partner. But half of men aged 35 to 54 think that people watch it because they don't have a partner.
Right.
So
only a third because they don't have a partner. So that would presumably then what's the other side of that? Have you got that written down?
I mean,
how many men think that you do watch it even though you do have a partner?
it's kind of it's the flip of that. It's a bit more.
Oh, was it a binary? It was just a yes or no question.
It's a bit more binary, that one. But I think the interesting thing about
you lot love pluralities. You know what I mean? I didn't want to,
But the interesting thing about it is that it's kind of half of men 35 to 54 thinking that people watch it because they don't have a partner is quite suggestive of what function they think porn is fulfilling, to do with loneliness, probably also to do with access, but to do with kind of like loneliness, boredom, disconnection. Like they're watching it because they don't have anyone. They don't have a relationship. So they essentially have a relationship with themselves. 1 in 5 young men, so 20% of young men think that people watch porn because it feels safer or less complicated than real life relationships. And again, like throughout this whole series, trying to put some of these statistics in context, right? So if we're testing a product for one of our clients and we say 80% of people love this and 20% of people don't like it, probably that product gets made and launched. But when we're talking about attitudes to really important stuff, I think that 20% of young men thinking that people watch porn because it just feels safer than having a real relationship, given everything else we've been talking about around dating, loneliness, like how to make friendships. It's quite sad, really.
That is really sad. And it also, it goes some way to explaining it goes some way to explaining as well sort of the rise in the chat LLM functions and why there's been this sort of almost moral panic actually about why are people talking on to chatbots, why aren't they talking to people in real life, and actually that goes some way to explaining it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, there's a period of time where you could actually develop the relationship with a chatbot, like a ChatGPT. There was a thing like 4 or 5 months ago where it was a real phenomenon where people were having like girlfriend boyfriend relationships with ChatGPT, and then OpenAI had to change the algorithm to become less affectionate, even though the LLM is just like a feedback machine, right?
Well, I had this sort of semi-off-record dinner with one of the big companies that owns or creates these LLMs, and I was asking them what safeguards have you got in place, and they were like, it's actually dramatically changed in the last 6 months or so. There are actually safeguards. If there is a relationship forming, there are options of do you need to speak to someone, rather than continuing the relationship.
And I think if you look at like Anthropic, who make Claude. Claude is designed to be helpful and not harmful. So it will essentially encourage you and tell you that you're great, unless what you're saying you want to do is commit suicide or commit a crime or whatever, which is maybe where some previous versions of some of the AIs have fallen down. We know from some of the previous stats we've had on this that young men are more likely than any other cohort to ask AI for advice on personal matters. So it is actually very important, especially in the light of this, that those AIs don't do harm. The whole thing about the girlfriends and boyfriends, where they basically updated the model, and so they had to delete everything from the servers. Because the other thing to say about AI is that it's horrifically unsustainable. So actually we can't just keep going at the pace. Like the data centers involved in keeping all of this stuff up is we at some point we need to reckon with that. So they have to start deleting things from the servers. And they were essentially people saying, you're deleting my boyfriend, you're deleting my girlfriend. Like they weren't the same afterwards. They didn't have the same personality. And actually that wasn't as gendered. That was both men and women.
Is that not just like real life though? We all grow older, we change. Can you adapt? Can your relationship sustain a big data deletion?
It's like you're not the same person anymore. It's like, well, I don't know, go and complain to OpenAI. I don't know. So it is an interesting one, and I think there
get you to pay premium though, isn't it? That's how they get you into the subscription service.
Well, because it's kind of like, right. So if you have multiple chats with Claude Claude can't read all of those chats unless you're premium. So you have to explain, sometimes you have to explain the same thing to Claude twice. And because it's helpful, it also will end up just telling you that you're fantastic and that your ideas are great. And then you say to it, can you be a bit more critical? And then it'll come back and say, actually, all your ideas are shit. So, there's a little bit of that. So I think, it's all part. So this is all part of people trying to find relationships in different ways. And when we talked about socializing last year, we talked about how young men are much more likely to form relationships kind of through gaming, through watching sport. We called it side-by-side friendships, online third spaces. We talked about all of this stuff. And they get quite criticized for that. It's like, get off your laptop, get off your TV. But that's just their way of trying to create relationships and connection in a society that has made it increasingly difficult to do those things face to face. There's nowhere for you to meet. There's nowhere for you to go. So we covered all this in the socializing thing. This is the same thing. It's kind of like, where do you, and we talked about in dating, like where do you meet people and where do you have those relationships? Increasingly, and then there's one final point to make on this bit, and then we'll dig into some of the other stuff. Online spaces are becoming increasingly gendered. So we are seeing women leave X and Reddit, and kind of it's predominantly now men on those platforms, men less likely to go on TikTok, Pinterest, Instagram. So the online spaces are becoming increasingly gendered. Friendship groups are becoming increasingly gendered. And then the algorithms on those sites are feeding stuff. So obviously on X and Reddit, it feeds kind of increasing manosphere type stuff to the men who go on there. And then in your real life, mixed friendship groups aren't maybe as much of a thing as it used to be. So where are you talking about and normalizing relationships and your knowledge of the opposite sex? Especially when it then comes to things like sexual relationships. And
we talked about this yesterday. Well, in a podcast that's coming out on Monday, we talked about this, that I don't want to be on Reddit anymore.
Yeah,
I've left Reddit. But then you're the consequence of that, as you're pointing to and as you're leading up to, is that if you don't have women on there sort of giving a voice of reason, it becomes an echo chamber that's actually very dangerous. It's fueling, it's fueling manosphere.
Exactly. And I think there's a tendency to try and create structures and quite overcomplicated fixes for things that used to just be dealt with relatively easily as part of just the general culture. So, creating, ombudsmans and online safety bill and kind of going into schools and educating people and putting people through courses to say to young men, you probably shouldn't strangle someone while you're having sex with them, is probably something that in the general flow of life, when people were out with each other more face to face and talking to each other, all it would take is for one girl in your friendship group to be like, that's so creepy, I wouldn't want anyone to do that. And then all of a sudden, all of those guys are like, yeah, probably best not do that. Whereas now, because that's not happening as much, it's all about education, quote unquote education. Let's educate young men on this stuff. Which, I'm not saying that we shouldn't do, but I think that the theme of a lot of the stuff that we've talked about over the past year is kind of like, actually stop trying to fix young men and fix some of the things in society that affect us all, that sense of disconnection. And then you will see the positive benefit and positive outcomes with young men. If all you're trying to do is educate and fix young men, funnily enough, they might not react that well to it. And for a generation of young men who probably, 5 years ago were feeling largely ignored, now they maybe feel largely patronized and made to feel like they're a problem that needs to be solved. Neither of those things are healthy.
Yeah, I mean, that's the worrying thing about the aspect of it that's in that stat you were talking about. I think I saw that the total numbers in the entire set, I think the second most common reason for watching porn was addiction that people were putting down.
Yeah.
But on the point of trying to fix the systems rather than to fix the men.
Yeah.
The worrying thing I would have thought when it comes to porn in particular is the question of at what point do you reach young men? Because as we were saying, we were talking about guys that are teenagers. There has to be schools in the country where people are accessing porn far, far earlier than their teenage years.
Yeah.
At what point do you then have
13
sex education? At what point do you have relationship education? At what point do parents start to push back against that?
Yeah.
There's many factors at play there that are not just well, they shouldn't be using crypto. They shouldn't be sat playing FIFA all day. They shouldn't be watching porn all day. Like, okay, there's probably something that can be done for certain aspects of this, but the pornography situation is psychological.
Yeah.
It's sexual.
Yeah.
It's relationship based. It's the online echo chambers that men exist in and reinforce the norms that they kind of go into the personal relationships with women in.
Yeah.
It seems scary. I wouldn't want to be a young man today.
No.
13 does seem quite old, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean that's the average. So obviously it will be younger than that. And it is probably different in different areas of the country. And again, don't want to air them out, but according to Pornhub, the city in the UK with the most people who watch porn is Newcastle.
Really?
Yeah.
Colder, I suppose.
Yeah.
Cold up there. Cold up there.
The heat, get under the blanket.
But I do think probably it is different, and there's massive intersectionality across everything that we talk about. So obviously, kind of working class, middle class, like, all of these things affect it as well. I mean, so addiction was the second most quoted reason, so 42%. The most quoted reason why people think other people watch porn is sexual arousal or release, 51%, which isn't that high, given that you could argue the point of porn supposedly is that.
Yeah.
But then it kind of gets to the point where, like, is that the point of porn anymore? And you sort of do start to get into this if you sat porn producers down and gave them some kind of truth serum and was like, what do you think is the reason for doing what you do? They may not even know themselves, but it does feel like there starts to be it's the kind of industrialization of a lot of the things that we've been talking about in this whole series around manosphere, self-affirmation of men versus women, the competitive like gender war between people. And you look at pornography, and maybe in 100 years time people will look back at this era and just be like, this is like the mass weaponization of pretty horrible views of women and what women are and what they're worth, that was then just fed to an entire population.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a point in there about how pornography is feeding the narrative, but then the narrative is also feeding pornography.
Yeah.
I mean, there was I remember it's nuanced, right? But I remember being on Piers Morgan's show, and there was sort of the platitude that was offered to me was that, actually women like to be submissive. And it's like, well, yes, there are there's definitely sexual fantasies that are about submission. But I would say the way that pornography is structured is that you will enter a site and pretty much every scene there is a submissive woman, right? So you're not catering to certain women who have those fantasies. What you're actually doing is creating a rather pervasive narrative that this is how women always want to be treated.
It's not portraying a diverse sexual dynamic in culture. It's one dominant man, submissive woman.
And the prevalence of like everyday scenarios has also probably done. I mean, this goes back to like, Confessions of a Window Cleaner, I suppose. It's always been around, but like that idea that basically sex is on everyone's mind, is available in any situation. So in the workplace, like at getting your car fixed, like the prevalence of those scenarios, I think probably has gone some way to, inappropriateness in areas where, sex is, no one's thinking about sex in this situation apart from people who are addicted to porn and watch too much of it. And again, like, we don't want to be prudish about all of this stuff. Like the point is not kind of like, oh God, it's all terrible and we should get rid of it and all that kind of stuff. I don't think that's what
I always really push back on that. I really don't like the sort of like, okay, well, what we've got to do is just cut it off. We've got to just stop it immediately. It's sort of like, how do you make it healthier? But then this is the kind of the wider problem of the way that we have dealt with anything vaguely problematic over the last 10 years is to ban it. And we're going to come on to workplace attitudes, but like what you're saying there about the window cleaner theory and about like sex being available, there certainly was a time, my mother would talk about she's going to hate that I called her my mother. She's going to hate that. But anyway.
You're what?
Yeah. She would talk about, being in the office and you might have like, your bum grabbed, or you might be talking, down to, and it was sort of quite a natural facet or, part of being in the office culture. However, we've brought in bans now, bans on you can't do that. I'm not saying, like women want to have their bum grabbed in the office, but I do think that you want to have a bit of a laugh and a joke. And there is a fear in the office, like, oh, I can't say that. Or, I'm going to be silent in the office today in case I say something that offends someone. Bringing in those bans has actually had a huge detrimental effect that probably leads back to the loneliness epidemic that we've been talking about.
Yeah, potentially. So
God, that was a bit of a sermon. Sorry.
No.
Cut that out if you like, Ben. It's fine.
Don't.
No. So yeah.
Move to
Well, should we stay on the workplace?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can stay on the workplace. Taboos. Do you want to talk about taboos in the workplace?
Yeah.
So we talked about
Richie's here today to tell you what you can and cannot do in the office.
Yeah, I wouldn't like to be the poster boy for that, but
It's just a big sign in the office with him. Yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah.
No touching.
Okay, chief hypocrite. So we asked about taboos. The proxy question that we used was, which of these things do you think is appropriate or inappropriate in the workplace? And we could have also done the classic sort of dinner party question, which of these is polite or impolite to talk about in company. So we talked about, do you think it's acceptable in work to talk about money, sex, politics, religion, your plans to have a family or children, and do you think it's acceptable to swear? And there was a load of stuff in here, and the charts on this are relatively complex, but overall, men are less sensitive to taboos than women. So across everything that we asked about, men are more likely to consider the topic acceptable to talk about at work. So it varies a little bit. Young men are the most likely to consider it acceptable to talk about money. So 2/3 of young men think, yeah, it's fine to talk about money at work. A little bit ahead of other male demographics, and they're all ahead of women. Young women really break with older women on that topic. So 56% of young women think it's fine to talk about money. Around 37% of the older female groups think that it is.
So this is why men were being paid more than women.
But that was exactly my thought. I wonder if it's skewing younger because of the kind of boomer generation, have a house, have a mortgage, have 2.5 kids. I'm all right, Jack.
Yeah.
Younger generation, I'm fucked. Please.
Yeah, there maybe is a bit of that. I think there's probably also, thinking about this, probably two things. One, the prevalence of side hustles. So actually other ways of making money outside of your day job. People talking about that is probably one thing. And then the other thing, and I'm also acutely aware that we've got Jessica, who's one of our recent grads who sat at IPSOS, who sat right here. So maybe you know better than me on this. But the perception, and I had this when I was younger, the perception that the last thing your business wants all of you young people to talk about is what you're all paid.
Yeah, of course.
And there's this, and it still exists today. It's kind of like they don't want us to be talking about this, so we're going to go to the pub and talk about it. Young people have always talked about what they're paid with each other, right? They may just have not done it openly in the office. And I think there is a consistent push around things like pay transparency. Part of the push around pay transparency is around gender pay gap, which is really important for businesses to track and be aware of, and other pay gaps that might exist that might be systemic underpaying of certain groups. But there is also always been a thing of young people saying, well, everyone should know what everyone is paid in this business. That's the only way that we can ever be fully transparent. And then business leaders being like, that's insane, and here are all the reasons why that's not a good thing for any of us. So there's always this tension. And so actually talking about money in work is potentially a way for young people to try and get a little bit of ownership around, to your point, like what can feel like a very unfair situation, and perceptions that, well, the reason you don't want us to talk about money in work is because we're not paid that much, and if we find out what you're paid, we'll revolt. Essentially. So I think probably there is a little bit of that.
It's intersectional, like you touched on there, though, isn't it? I mean, speaking in broad strokes, but, if you are BAME or a woman, gay, that's not helpful either.
Yeah.
Typically, historically, you may have been paid less than your white male peers.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
In the Western world.
Yeah. And it is just a fact that happens, and that's why there's such a focus on pay gap reporting. Other stuff, The majority of young men think it's acceptable to ask people about their plans to get married or have kids, so 61%. But young men are the least likely male age group to feel that way. So you can see young men are a bit more attuned to the fact that maybe people wouldn't want to be asked.
I don't, because it's a strange one, isn't it? Because I think about the only real time I've been asked sort of apropos of nothing of when am I having children was by a much older colleague. And I didn't find, I remember being quite taken aback by it because I was like, I haven't even thought about it. But I wasn't offended by it because I thought, well, it's an older generation thing. You know, this is like, you know, normal chat for this person. I think if Sean came in tomorrow and said, when are you going to have babies? I would find that incredibly strange. You know?
That would, and I think there is an acceptance that maybe it's older people who ask it. I've been quite intensely questioned, especially over the past 5 years, by older colleagues.
I think men are now asked more about it. I think it has become unacceptable to ask women. But I do think younger men that
I've been asked about it loads. So have you got kids? No. I think I'm one of only 2 people on the UK board of IPSOS who doesn't have kids.
Really?
Yeah.
Because you've been asking everyone. That's why you know.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of like you don't have them. Why?
Getting into other people's business.
Yeah, it's like why don't you have them? And I, you know, if I've had a few drinks, my shitty answer is like, well, why do you have them? Can you give me a cogent answer which is beyond just the imperative that we're born with? Why do you have them? Especially since you complain about them a lot.
There you go.
So you
hates kids.
Exactly. That's quite. Oh God, don't do that. So
and on Easter weekend too.
It's better than Richie Jones loves kids, which I feel like if you don't, you don't want that out there either. I'm neutral on kids. So
you get like a strap to go across. Breaking
neutral on kids.
That's the only clip that's going out from this entire podcast.
I take kids on a case by case basis.
That's it. That's the one.
There you go.
Back to this
case by case.
Keep delivering for us here, Richard.
Back to the stats.
Well, Ben, are you writing this down?
God. Okay, right. So 45% of young women say it's never acceptable to ask people about their plans to get married or have kids.
I think I do get that. I do understand that. I would find it. I think if we're quite close, Sean and I, we will spend time outside of work together as well. So I think if you asked me it, like, are you going to marry your current partner? I wouldn't feel offended by it. But I think if someone I didn't really know said it apropos of nothing, I would find it quite...
It's like small talk. I think this thing is like, it probably isn't like a small talk thing. And I think, you know, some people really want kids, can't have them. Some people, I think you do get into sort of dodgy areas, but it's an interesting one, this, because for most of the topics, it's moved from being a taboo to not really being a taboo. Young men and men have gone quicker on that journey, but probably everyone has. We also asked people whether they thought it was more or less of a taboo versus 20 years ago. On most of these topics, it's moved one way, and on that topic, it's moved the other way. So it's become less acceptable to ask about that, but it's become more acceptable to talk about everything else. So we were talking before this.
Wait, hang on, brief interlude.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask Jessica a question. What do you reckon? If you walked in to Ipsos one morning and Richie said, when are you getting married? What would you say? Would you feel weird about it?
Yes, I think in the work context, yes, I think I understand what you were saying about, like, if it's small chat and you're with your friends, I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's something that can come up. But I think especially as a young woman being asked about it at work, you might be thinking, I don't know, are they worried that I'm going to go on maternity leave?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Because
that was a bloody comprehensive answer. Why didn't you come up with anything like that?
Because I'm just a useless old
man. So interesting. I didn't even think about that because you'd be worried about maternity leave. Yeah.
Well, it's the precarity of the workplace. Now, like, I think a lot of the answers here are to do with changing workplace dynamics. More like a more balance of genders in the workplace in the last 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
A more precarious working situation for a lot of young people versus 20 years ago. It seems to reflect that kind of instability that young people feel, but also kind of like how the workplace used to be a much more social environment than now, where it's you go in, you do your work, you have to hit those KPIs and you have to get out. Whereas before it's, you might spend the evening with your colleagues every evening. You might go to your colleagues' weddings. You might go to, I don't know if that's still a thing that people do. But I haven't been to, nobody's invited me to their wedding. Anyway.
Some.
But
Yeah.
It's because you haven't asked them when they're getting married. That's why.
Well, this is it.
Presume that
Yeah.
you're not interested.
I'm just too woke for it.
Very good. Go on to the next bit.
Okay.
Enough from him.
Enough
It's
from
going
him.
on about, yeah.
So look, this general
Not
thing
going
around
out with your colleagues. You're always out with your colleagues. You love lying. Sorry. Richie.
Some of the other stuff, and again, if you use the dinner party proxy, that we might have illuminated maybe slightly different things. But again, we were talking about politics. It used to be like, don't talk about politics and religion at dinner because you might get into disagreements with the people you're having dinner with. I'd argue if they're at your house for dinner these days, it's probably because you're politically aligned. Like that's just kind of the way that society has gone.
Well, what does that say? I like having robust conversation.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on how robust. I think that there's probably been we see this in other data. There's probably been like a lumping of. There's a sort of like slightly reductive lumping of attitudes, so that now it feels much more like if you have a dinner party or you go for dinner and someone says, I voted Conservative at the last election, they might as well say Mussolini had some good ideas. Like it just feels like there's this kind of real sort of like, we're not inviting him again, and that's probably not been helpful for our society to see these kind of divisions and this lack of willingness to listen to other ideas alongside probably a more performative openness to those ideas. So again, when we were talking about the dating stuff and the socializing stuff, we touched on this, which is when we asked young women what they look for in a partner, and they said kindness and a good sense of humor, and we asked young men what they think young women look for, and they said good looks, height, financial status, and then we put it to young men. Well, actually, young women say that they want someone who's kind and with a good sense of humor, and a lot of those young men were like, they just know what to say. They just know what to say, and so this idea that there's increasingly a veneer over society, either perceived or real, that everyone, to your point earlier, Ava, like everyone watches what they say, is careful about what they say, is maybe not sharing their honest views. And I've got a quote. This is in the FT, January 2025, when Trump started his second term. And this was from a quote from the FT. Bankers and financiers say that Trump's victory has empowered those who felt they had to self-censor or change their language to avoid offending younger colleagues, women, minorities, or disabled people. I feel liberated, said a top banker. We can say the R word and the P word without the fear of getting cancelled. It's a new dawn.
What's the P word?
I was just thinking the same thing.
Pussy.
Oh.
I'm allowed to say that, aren't I?
Yeah.
Was that banned?
No, I just didn't know.
Was that a racially aggravated slur? I
was just playing it safe, and you can no longer just, hey, the president says it, so it must be okay. I was just playing it safe, guys.
Right, okay, yeah. He's been saying that for years, though, hasn't he?
The president.
Well, famous.
Just to be clear, you're not.
Richie Jones been saying
that. We don't. Let's not have a strap. Rarely, if ever, says it.
Loves saying it.
Yeah.
When he does, rarely, if ever.
Yeah.
I was talking to Ash Sarker about the dating thing a while ago, and she was making the point that on the perception of young men believe that looks maxing is what's going to get them a woman. Women want men that are kind. The environment within which relationships begin, I think, has a lot to do with that, because a lot of people experience dating through apps now. You're not going to tell if someone's kind when you're looking at a photograph of them. So dating apps oftentimes reinforce that feeling in men that I have to be good looking. I have to be muscly. I have to be like, there's no other way to display myself.
We're all just a slave to the algorithm, really, aren't we?
Yeah.
You know, that's why you lot aren't ever put forward. The sort of like no, but truly, so I didn't even mean that.
Wait, you lot
that
being
pejorative.
nice guys like me.
Irish. No, you know, you think about the sort of the diagnosis from a lot of the manosphere about dating apps is correct. It's the sort of the the solution is not. So the first premise being that, women go on a dating app and they might get, 4 or 5 matches a day, whereas men might be lucky to get 2 a week, right? And, so it's like, then next premise is the power is in women's hands. And then the solution is you must be more forthright. Actually, this is just a data company who is trying to entice women to use that app. And so it shows
men to pay for it.
Exactly. And so it will show their profile to more men in order to keep women using the app. To just, this is purely financial. And the sad thing is that both parties are losing out. Men are losing out because they feel rejected, and women are losing out because they are now, the subject of pretty demonizing rhetoric.
And there's a lot of, you hear a lot of chat. I rarely speak to anyone who's on dating apps that finds that a great experience. But if you come off it, what's the alternative? Because again, goes back to socializing, like systematically close down all of the places that you might meet somebody. And in the workplace environment, which used to be a very common place, like
can't ask them if they're married or not.
Can't ask them if they're married or not. Or what their attitudes to family are. So it has kind of closed that down. And look, you can argue the pros and cons of that. And I'm not saying that that's been a bad thing or a good thing, but it is a thing, and it has affected people's ability to create those relationships in real life. There's also loads of other stuff. If you go online, there's things like, I'm at the gym to work out, not to meet someone. I'm at the supermarket to do my shopping, not to meet somebody. And all those things are perfectly valid. And if it stops women from being constantly pestered as they're going about their daily lives, that is a good thing. We also need to recognize that the kind of systematic societal, it is not okay to show romantic or sexual interest in anybody in any of these situations outside of an app. If I was the owner and builder of a dating app, I'd be rubbing my hands together at that idea. Like, we have basically now got the monopoly on how men and women can interact when that's what the intention is, and no one else is allowed to do it.
But I do think
even apps like Nextdoor and stuff, like the segmentation of society through technology to the point where there's apps that have become neighborhood watches. Or Facebook groups
rather than going out to have a look,
rather than talking to your neighbors.
I mean, Nextdoor. I mean, God, if you read the Nextdoor for my area, it's like I don't think there's been a place in human history with more violence than Highbury.
The fall of Rome was tamer than this.
But I do think, I just want to sort of piggyback on what you were saying about supermarkets and wanting to not be bothered. I do think one criticism, and I'm going to speak for women here, one criticism I will give to my fellow women, we've got to stop this sort of there are a few loud people on on social media who say things like, and don't bother me when I'm at the bar because I want to be with my girlfriends. Actually, most women want to talk to men at bars. They would like to meet people in real life. They would actually like to have those conversations. And you're putting men off from wanting to make the first move. I think you got to think about this normally, right? Obviously, a woman doesn't want to be approached in the supermarket. Obviously, she doesn't want to be approached at the gym. Gym, last place I ever want to talk to anyone. If I saw my partner in the gym, I'd be like, you can leave, come back later. Do you know what I mean? But when you're out drinking and you might be with your girlfriends, you are out for a good time and you would like to meet people.
I think there's a tendency, and again, banning something is like the ultimate reductiveness, right? Nothing else has worked, we'll ban it. Like, it's binary, it's yes or no, right? So with the bar thing, again, look, there are nuances, right? And I think, yes, if you think about it normally, most women are not saying, I never want to be approached by a man in a bar. What they're saying is, I get approached by people who are really creepy and inappropriate and don't take a hint and even don't take me saying, can you please go away and leave us alone? And so probably it's easier if none of you approach us actually than having to deal with these people.
You shame me because you're correct. You do actually sometimes. Also,
I mean, it's basically
it's all nuance.
Everything comes down to don't be creepy. And again, it's one of the comments on the last pod, or maybe the one before that, where we were talking about looks maxing in the context of all of this stuff, and we were kind of saying, self-improvement used to be become smarter, funnier, go and read a book. And maybe these guys who are smashing their cheekbones to try and get better cheekbones are being a bit silly about the whole thing. Like, why don't you go and read a book? And there were some comments that are like, that we were maybe being too flippant about young men's lived experiences and what they're going through. And I get it, because actually your point about the algorithm and the dating apps is a very valid one in the light of what some of the commenters were saying, which is, on the app, no one can see if you've read a book. No one give a shit. Like, you can get AI to write your profile. So, and most people probably do now. So you can't show that you're learned or funny in an authentic way through that. The only thing you have is that picture. So obviously that makes complete sense. So I take the point from the commenters. However, once you get past that app and once you actually do meet somebody, all these other things do become more important. And, Clavicula's got a girlfriend now, you were telling me.
Yeah, yeah.
And so he's court maxing.
Whoa, Vicky?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whoa, Vicky. I don't know if that's I don't know. Okay.
Another streamer.
It will, okay. So he's done the thing that his whole vibe was about, which is how to be more attractive to women and kind of what. So he's got a girlfriend. So let's see where Clavicula goes with his advice to young men, because once you've actually got a girlfriend, like, I'm not saying that it's not a license to immediately become less attractive, but other things start to become more important. And, Clavicula's 19 years old, right? And he's out here giving advice. Maybe this 19-year-old might learn that there is a bit more to relationships. But given that she's called Whoa Vicky and they've already got like a live stream together, I don't know.
But that is the thing. Like, when you get into a relationship, or if you're in your early teens, late teens, moving from an almost exclusively male friend group into a world where you're hanging around with a woman, you might hang around with her friends, your perception of reality changes. If you're stuck in this, this is what men do, this is the problems that men have, your whole philosophy on looks maxing, or your whole philosophy on the opposite sex will change fundamentally, because you're then developing platonic relationships with women, romantic relationships with women. But it goes back to the loneliness.
Have a romantic relationship with a woman without having a platonic relationship. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. But to the loneliness point, it feels like it's that, like, the stopgap before that. Like, generally speaking, I think all of the polling that's been done seems to point to young men are okay. They're aware that there are problems in the society that they live in, and they have no choice but to interact with society in this way, because that is the world that they've been launched into. There just takes a tip over, if everyone's aware, but they're using these things and are aware of the dangers and aware of the financial risk, social risk, mental risks, there will come a point where things change.
Yeah. And increasingly so. And I think as we get into sort of Gen Alpha, we're already seeing a drop off in social media usage. Young people are the fastest group who are switching off from it. I was talking to someone from Ofcom last week, and we were talking about this topic. Like, ultimately, what might do for a lot of the kind of the more harmful social media and the prevalence and the living lives on social media probably won't be bans, it won't be education, it won't be any of those things. It will just be that a younger group of people decide that it's a really lame and boring thing to do. This is normally what kills any movement of this type.
And they start drinking again.
Yeah, and they will potentially, and they will look at, certainly kind of like my generation and what we were doing on like Facebook when it first came out, and Instagram, and think that it's crazy and really lame what we did, and they will maybe move away from it. There's a fantastic guy called Lee Chambers, who is the founder of Male Allies UK, who we've done some work with, and he speaks around the country on lots of topics. And he's done some really interesting work with young boys, asking them about social media. And there's a significant chunk of boys, so 11, 12-year-olds and even younger, who think that social media should be banned. So we are likely to see an incoming generation who at the minute are in school, in some cases in primary school, who are kind of like, just get rid of it. Like, we don't need it, it's harmful, we don't want it, it's rubbish. And so there is, a lot of this series has not been hugely hopeful, but I do feel like, you don't want to put too much on young people. And it's not about them fixing it. It's not about them having to do anything and fix what we have broken. It is just about they will have different attitudes and behaviors, and it might swing back the other way. And we can already see the green shoots of that swinging back the other way. And again, I'm not talking about banning social media. I'm not talking about, banning big tech. There's a job for them to do. There's a job for parents to do. There's a job for politicians to do. I think what we're talking about when it comes to porn, social media, all of this stuff is, can we get to a point where people have more normal and manageable and intentional interactions with this stuff, as opposed to the prevalence of comments about addiction, boredom, disassociation, that we've been getting throughout the whole series. Like, none of this feels healthy. So it doesn't mean that we can't get to that point. And it doesn't mean that banning everything is necessarily the answer. But if you're Keir Starmer, you probably look at some of this stuff. I mean, he'll be looking at Australia and their kind of social media ban. Australia are experimenting on behalf of the rest of the world right now on what happens when you do this. We will see the results of that experiment.
And France this week, I think, was under 15s and not allowed on social media anymore. Yeah.
We asked people about age gap relationships because there's a lot of online discourse around age gap relationships. So we thought it was an interesting thing to look at.
It's huge.
Yeah, it is huge. And there's a lot of, he's grooming her, and it's like a 25-year-old that we're talking about. There's a lot of
the 25-year-old is a girl in this scenario,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And the man is older. Okay.
Yeah, the man is older. And it feels like, we were kind of talking before about, there seems to be a lot of age gap, really old dude who looks like he's on his last legs with a very young woman and, gold diggers. That kind of narrative has been around for a long time. And you were talking about Bill Belichick. He used to be the coach of the New England Patriots, and his younger wife, I think he married her, I'm not quite sure. So there's always been quite a lot of,
they post some fantastic Instagram stories together.
Yeah.
Do they?
So
all her doing, I imagine. Yeah.
Who's actually doing the technology? Who knows? So we asked people about age gap relationships, and it was interesting. So half of people, so everyone we surveyed, and as you know, we survey all both genders and all ages, half of Britons think there is no limit to the maximum acceptable age gap within a relationship, regardless of whether the man or the woman is the older party. So half of people couldn't care less. They're like, as long as it's consensual and as long as they're both, over 18, we don't care.
Love is love.
Love is love. People aged, this maybe won't be that surprising. People aged 55 to 75 are 2 times as likely to hold this view. But men and women equally, right? So if you're 55 to 75, you're like, hey, guys, love is love. No limit. If I meet a 22-year-old tomorrow, I want to have the option without any kind of societal taboo.
It's got to be gay men. This is so prevalent with you. You've always got your older gay man, younger Brazilian boy.
Yeah.
Over, of age.
Yeah, boy
of age.
being 20-something.
Of age.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not in the data, but okay. We will ask that next time.
I'm just speaking from experience.
So when you then get
As a gay man.
As a gay man.
With a Brazilian boy.
When you get...
Why am I the older one in this scenario?
Well, you're not Brazilian. What?
Right.
Okay. So they're 2 times as likely to hold that view. And then you get, it's not, I'm just, it's fine. I just did after what I said earlier about, I don't want to keep having disclaimers around my attitudes to children, Brazilians, gay guys. It's in the
what do you
he has said before
gays?
He likes Brazil.
I wasn't thinking anything. You would, okay. 3 in 10 Britons aged 16 to 34 think that it's fine. There's no limit, right? So that's 28%.
To be gay. What are we talking about here?
Maximum acceptable age gap.
3 in 10 think that an age gap is acceptable.
Yeah, whatever it is, it's fine. So then when we kind of dig down into it and we asked about what do we think the upper limit...
More enthusiastic. This was the bit I was most looking forward to.
When we think...
He's like, yeah, 3 in 10, shut up. We'll tidy this up in post.
Okay, fine. No, this is good. Okay. We asked people about what the upper limit. So if you think that there should be a gap, what is the acceptable gap, and what is the upper limit of that? So the larger share of young men consider 5 years to be the upper limit of an acceptable age gap, regardless of whether the man is older or the woman is older.
Really?
Yes.
I don't
5
believe them.
years. 5 years. Well, then let's look at young women.
Many Dustin Hoffmans in The Graduate out there.
No.
So yeah, that's interesting, because when we then look at young women, they think that 10 years is the upper limit if the man is older, but then they're divided as to whether the upper limit should be 5, 7, or 10 years if the woman is older. So if you break that down, young men are like, yeah, let's just take the man being older for a second. Young men will say, yeah, if the man is the older party, 5 years is the limit. And young women are like, if the man is the older party, 10 years is the limit. Now, correlation, causation, we can argue around it, but I remember being a young man once. And if I was a young man that had some of the attitudes that we know a lot of young men have today, which is around, I'm lonely, I'm on an app, the algorithm isn't helping me, I'm looks maxing, or at least considering it, I'm very competitive when it comes to finances, and I think that what young women are looking for is handsomeness and money, I probably wouldn't be hugely keen
on older men being in the
older
scene.
men hanging around and like young women wanting to go out with those older.
Right.
I'd be like, no, 5 years is the limit.
So it is about being competitive.
Probably there is an element of competitiveness.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. I'd be amazed if it wasn't. That
I was
going to
add to that as well. Do you think that this is when they're thinking of the vein of like settling down rather than dating? Do you think that's what they're looking to? Like, if you do you think in situationships, for example, they like a man would be more accepting of a much younger or much older woman?
I don't know.
Well, that's a question for next time.
I'm not entirely sure what a situationship is. It's one of those terms I hear a lot, and I've never asked.
I don't like it. I don't like it as a term.
I don't like it all, and I don't like actually how natural it's become in my vocabulary. Like the sort of like, yeah.
Just call it dating. Just call it dating.
I would say seeing each other, really. That's kind of what it is, isn't it?
However, I have heard where it becomes a situationship is if several months have gone by and you're still dating and there's not, like, if there has been maybe a conversation of, are we boyfriend and girlfriend? Are we not?
And there's been a no. Oh, well, get out. Get out.
Not a no, but like a man being like, I just need more time, you know? Like, I really want to get to know you, you know?
So is it just dating somebody before you put a label on what it is that you want? Is that a situation?
No, I think it's like for the
would've
people who
thought-
perpetually don't want label.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
A long-term nothing.
Right.
Like long-term
Yeah,
dating
okay,
is a
fine.
situationship. Yeah.
Don't know. But
I don't think they're particularly kind things.
I would imagine that it would be more fluid in terms of the age gap in a situationship. But I think as well, if you're talking about intentionally dating somebody to settle down.
That's what I think. I think when there's dating with intention, I think that's when the 5 years makes total sense to me.
that's where you also need to ask what your attitudes to getting married and having kids are, I suppose, which would
Where you can't
don't
ask
like doing.
because of woke.
Yeah. Not in the workplace. Don't you dare.
Interesting. I mean, I guess, again, this isn't Ipsos data, but what you're describing is also probably relatively prevalent amongst older retired people who are widowed or divorced.
Yeah.
Like this kind of thing. I'm seeing a woman or I'm seeing a chap and he's really nice, but, we just sort of, it's casual. Like older people also do that quite a lot, once they're in kind of a different phase of life. It's not necessarily just a young person's thing.
For sure, there's a
I'd say
fantastic
it's even
documentary
more
set
an
in
older
Florida
person thing.
that's all about. It's amazing.
Oh, is it that town?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
But I'd say also over 25, 5 years becomes negligible. It all sort of blends into one, really, doesn't it? Like a 25-year-old woman and a 30-year-old man, I think, have a lot in common.
Well, we're younger at heart than you are.
You are.
That's one way of putting it.
Yeah.
we mature slower.
Later development.
No,
Yeah.
younger at heart.
I guess you look at it and you're kind of like, well, when you're 75 and they're 70, or even when you're 75 and they're 65, does it really matter that much? Like that
It
all
matters
seems
when someone's 65 and the
much
other one's 60 because, we're talking about that pension.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, that's plan ahead and think about that. But yeah,
He's
and then
just always texting me. He has so much time on his hands.
Yeah.
He's retired.
he's always on the bus. No one needs to be on the bus as much as him.
always on the bus.
He's always on the bus. He never that car never moves. But this conversation's been around for a long time. It's like, oh, it's half your age plus A or whatever it might be, and everyone's got examples of stuff. And I was at a talk that Zadie Smith gave a couple of weeks ago, and
Oh, bet that was fun.
she was saying that her dad was 50 when he met her mum, who was 20. And there was a gasp in the audience. There were gasps in the audience.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And there's also an interesting intersectionality thing there, because her dad is white and her mum's black. And you could feel people judging her dad in the room. And she didn't really judge him for that. I think she kind of maybe judged him for some other things. And she was kind of, which she's talked about widely and written about. So it's not like it wasn't a private conversation. But there were gasps in the audience when she said that, yeah. But there are all kinds of these examples. People grow up with all sorts of gaps between their parents and all that kind of stuff, and it becomes normalized in families. But then you also have very prevalent examples. Leonardo DiCaprio probably is like the most common public example of like the jokes about the fact that once women get above 26, he dumps them. And he kind of laughs it off, and he sort of has to laugh it off because the evidence is right there. Like, he literally does do that. And so you kind of wonder what's going on and what it says about him. People can't help but wonder what it says about him that he wants to do this. So,
well, if you read the blogs, we'll talk about it afterwards.
Yeah. So there's a lot of that, but I think that you can, if you're immersed in online and in the discourse, I think you can probably think that pretty much everybody feels like it's creepy, especially when it's an older man, a younger woman. And what the data says is that half of people couldn't care less, and that it's a bigger deal for younger people than older people because they're just more online and kind of more in this discourse. And also, probably if you're a young woman, probably just more aware of older predatory men. And if you're a younger man, probably also more aware of older predatory men who are, you're probably, you might look at it as in your competitor set. I don't know. So
I also wonder if there's a factor of it that's like cultural. What would you talk to this older person about? You've got a very different experience of the world to them.
Yeah.
I mean, looking at it nicely, I'd imagine there is a financial aspect to it as well, certainly, the competition part. But yeah, I don't know what I'd talk to a 60-year-old about.
I do. On that more uplifting note, Richie Jones, thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.